How many of you have heard of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad? How many of you have read it? Somebody read it? So a guy actually that grew up in Hawaii, he wrote a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which was kind of about investments. And he talks a little bit about how he grew up and his dad worked for a living and what his dad taught him as far as how to treat money and things like that. And he had a friend whose dad was a little wealthier, and how he grew up and how he was taught to understand and deal with money and investments. And so the message title today is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Wealthy Father. And I want to talk a little bit today about investments. Investments. Who here has ever invested money of any kind? It could be anything. It could be stocks, it could be properties, it could be businesses, it could be anything. Car that you like, a boat. So pretty much everybody here has invested some type of money into something else, right? So what determines what a good investment is? What would you say the criteria is typically?
Goes up in value.
It goes up in value. Okay, it goes up in value.
Low risk.
Low risk, okay. What's some other things?
Good return.
Good return. In other words, you got to make money on it. That's the purpose of an investment, is to make money on it. And when you read about good investments, and what I really enjoy is when someone that had no idea what they were doing or what they were invested in, and it suddenly takes off. One of my favorite companies, or products at least, is Apple. And it amazes me when they were first started, the people that got involved in that really had no idea that that type of industry would take off and become what it is today. Apple right now is valued more than any other company in the world. And you can't honestly say that even the most ardent of investors knew that was going to happen. Even with all their tools available, all their education, they had no idea that these companies sometimes are going to take off and just dominate like they have. And investments have been returned over and over and over, and profit has been made. I got into the stock market about 10 years ago, and I was so proud of myself that I invested in something. I just knew it was going to be a hit. Just knew it. And so I had two companies, and they were both going through their IPO, which is their public offering. That's when their stock first becomes available. And I thought, if I get these on the first day, and they're going to shoot through the roof, and I'll sell them and make a hefty profit. The first company, it worked out pretty good. The second company, when I did it roughly the same time, were supposed to be bought out by a larger company, and the larger company was offering a 30 or 40% premium on their stock. So I was looking to make 30 or 40% profit, which was great for one day of work, right? Well, the company rejected the larger company's offers. And within days, the stock was... And that company now has been divested and is parts of other companies. And all the founders, the owners, everybody have been replaced. Which shows you what a wise decision that was, a lack of wisdom. And so I had one good investment and one bad investment. And the weird thing is they offset each other almost to the dollar. You can imagine my frustration, because on one hand I had this great investment and I was making all this money, and on the other investment, straight through the floor. And so they evened out. So I ended up making nothing really. And so I learned something though. I learned a very, very valuable lesson. And that's what kind of what I want to talk about today. How many of you have made a bad investment? I mean, you guys have ever had a friend that just seemed to not understand what a good deal was? You guys ever had that? They buy the wrong car, the wrong house, the wrong stock. It just seems like they're perpetually just doing the wrong thing. I've got friends like that. But I've also got friends that they will buy something not based on what they have to pay for it, but based on what value it has to them. And to those of us on the outside, we think, why in the world would you buy that beat-up old junker? And to them, they don't see it as a junker. They see it as maybe a part of their life, maybe of times past, or maybe a different era, where things were different here in America. And so for them, it has a value beyond just the price of things. And so sometimes, and this is what I want to talk about today, sometimes investments, and I'm going to give you a definition. This is from Warren Buffett. He says, price is what you pay, value is what you get. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about investments. Okay? So bear with me. So, we know that God in the beginning, He took a lot of hands-on approach to humanity. I manage people. And I can tell you there's certain things I just don't do. It's not my function. And as a manager, it's not my job to get my hands dirty in certain areas. I have people that specialize in those things, and they do those things. So I do a lot of delegation. I'll say to this person, he take care of this, or you report to me on this, whatever. But if you notice in creation, God did not delegate. God had an army of angels that He could have commanded to create things, or to report to Him, or give Him ideas, or He could have said, I want you to go to this part of the earth and kind of look into this, and you guys go over here. God did it all Himself. He had a very active relationship with us in creation, whereas everything was hands-on. Everything that was created around us, all the world and all that splendor, the mountains, the water, the fish, the air, everything, He personally created. Does that tell you that God was vested in creation? Of course it does. He had a personal interest in it. He created all these wonders and these things for us. And when it finally came to man, who was the last creation before Sabbath, He personally did it with His hands. He formed us from the dust of the earth. Now this is the God of investment. And I want to explain that. God doesn't just invest in things as we see things. We see investments typically as, I buy this, I get this. Or I buy this type of property and in 10 years from now it'll be worth more. And what do I get back from that? God invests in people. He invests in people. And I'm going to use a story as an example today. If you guys would turn with me to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11. Hopefully this will make more sense when we're done. Luke 15, starting with verse 11. You guys should know this story. It's the prodigal son. Which I really think we should rename the story. It's not of the prodigal son, it's of the father. This story is about the father. It's not about his two sons, it's about the father. Starting with verse 11, it says, Then he said, A certain man had two sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate. And no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare? And I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion. And he ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years have I been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never made me a young goat, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Now, just some quick observations on this story. So, the father was obviously well-to-do. He had a lot of servants, he had a lot of cattle. And so his son, the youngest, comes to him and says, I want what's my inheritance now. Now let me ask you this, as a parent or grandparent or someone you know, was that a good investment to give his son money that he had earned, the father had earned? Do you think the father kind of knew what was going to happen to it? We know what we know, or we better know, our kids' characters. I think the father kind of understood where his son was at spiritually, emotionally, and all those other things. And so his son comes to him and says, Dad, I want my stuff now. His dad had to have known he's going to leave and he's probably going to blow it off. But what does he do? He gives it to him. Now, a lot of folks would say that's not very bright. I can imagine if one of us did that to one of our kids today, we give them their inheritance up front, knowing what kind of character they had, knowing that they had barely skated through our academy, knowing that they had an ill reputation as being someone who didn't care about the things of God. People would question, why in the world would you give your child that much money, knowing how foolish they are? And yet, the father gave it to him. Which brings me to the things I want to share today. The first is, God is a long-term investor. God is a long-term investor. You guys raised your hands on that you had invested. Now, if you've ever invested in stocks, you know what a roller coaster that can be. I mean, one day it's up, one day it's down, next week it's down, next week it's up. It's if you're looking for an emotional roller coaster ride, invest in stocks. And I want to give this example here. This is a beautiful example of what I mean by this. Would you guys agree that $6.2 billion is a lot of money? $6.2 billion. That's a lot of money even for the government. That's a whole lot of money. And this is what happened. It is roughly how much Warren Buffett's personal shareholdings in his Berkshire Hathaway declined in value between July 17th and August 31st, 1998. So a little over a month, that stock lost $6 billion in value. A whole lot of money, even for Mr. Buffett. And now for the $6 billion question. During those 45 days, how much money did Warren Buffett lose in the stock market? Zero. Why? He didn't sell it. So he had this investment that is tanking, that he's lost $6 billion on paper, and so many other investors sold. They said, we can't sustain these losses. And what did he do? He kept it. He kept it. And what happened? That stock went through the roof eventually. And he made billions and billions of dollars. And why is that? He didn't panic. Because he understood it's a long-term investment. That these things are going to happen. He knew that the value of the company that he had bought into, that eventually the ship would right, and eventually he would make a profit. And he held when so many others had abandoned ship. Your value to God does not go up or down. Period. That's hard for some of us to believe. We think that if we have a good week, that our value goes up. We think that our value goes up if we do certain things. We think that our value goes down if we have bad days. Or the days that our faith is challenged. Or the days that we question, God, are you there? Or the days that we're watching the news and think, God, are you paying attention? This world's getting worse and worse. But God does not sell your stock. He doesn't give up on you. He doesn't say, you're down 40% this week. I'm sorry, I got other things going on. I got to get rid of you. So your value maintains this is always the same with Him.
Amen.
One of the hardest things for me to always to wrap my head around is that God's love for us does not change. And as human beings, it's hard for us to understand that because even the people I love the most, there's some days I don't like them as much, right? You have some people like that you love dearly, but in some weeks it's like, I like you less than I did last week. And some other weeks you like them more. And usually what's that based on? What is their value based on in our world?
Your feelings.
Emotion is part of it. What they do for us. If my wife, was sweet last week and she did something for me and this week I'm expecting it and she doesn't do it, what happens? Well, she doesn't love me. We ever do that sometimes? But our stock does not fluctuate based upon our perceived value. Our value is based upon what God paid for us. Period. So the price and value in this case are the same. To think about that for a minute. Hold that thought. So God does not panic. He does not say, well, I'm not getting my investment back any time in the near future, so I probably need to sell and focus on the other investments. I'm sure that it's a sure bet. And the thing is that He invested equally in all humanity. Now we know the majority are lost. We know that the majority are lost, but yet He invested in them anyways. His Son died for the sinner as much as He died for the saint that will be in heaven. And you think, why would you invest so much of yourself for someone who would reject it? And we'll get to that. So God is a long-term investor. He doesn't panic when you have bad days. He doesn't get too excited when you have good days. He knows ultimately that His plan is for you to spend eternity with Him. That's His long game. That's ultimately what He wants, His return of investment, if you could say that. He wants you to spend eternity with Him. The second thing I'd like to share this morning is your value to God is not based on works. Praise the Lord for that. Praise the Lord. Now, the interesting thing about the story, the reason I wanted to bring up the story, is because we know that the Father, when He gave His Son the money, we know that from the ending of the story when His Son returned, why He did it. He wasn't looking at the temporary. He wasn't looking at the money He gave away. He wasn't looking at the money that His Son would eventually blow on stupid living. He knew ultimately He wanted His Son back home. And that was a small price to pay for His Son to come back. It was worth it to Him. But it's interesting, though, that both brothers actually felt the same way. And I want you to bear with me here. Verse 17 says, and this is the prodigal speaking, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So where did the prodigal think his worth was? In his works. And he thought, because his works had been in wickedness, that his value was now less than his father. So he went back thinking, before I was a son, but I've blown that out of the water and I'm not worthy to be that anymore. So I'm going to go back to my father and say, just let me be like one of your hired servants. So in his mind, his value he had been devalued to the point where he was barely a servant, where he would be paid for his wages, that he would have housing because he worked. And how did the father treat him when he came back? Did he give him a job? No. He gave him a fatted calf. He gave him a party. He gave him a robe of honor. He put sandals on his feet, which should tell you how broke he was. And he also put a ring on his finger. And they had a big party. So had the value of the son changed in the father's eyes? No. Not only did he treat him as a son again and welcome him back as his son, he was the guest of honor. You guys have probably heard me talk about this before, but usually the guest of honor, the word honor is in there, right? We're honoring something that they've done or something, the person they are. And I think it's amazing that someone who is not honorable gets the place of honor. You get treated as if you were righteous. This is what salvation is about, right? We are treated as if we were Christ. So we are given Christ's seat at the table, but by no merit of our own. But that's the value that God has placed upon us. And it does not change based upon our unrighteousness. It does not change based upon our wickedness. It does not even change based upon our good deeds. Now that was the prodigal. Now the elder brother, here's what he had to say. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I have never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as the son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. So how did the elder brother feel that his value was measured? By his works. He thought that his obedience all these years made him more valuable than his brother. That's a warning, by the way, just so you know. That's a warning to us. If God's value that He places on each one of us, sinner or saved, it doesn't matter, is the same and equal, do we have any right to try to devalue someone else? And this is what the elder brother didn't understand. That his father's love for him was not just because he was obedient. It wasn't just because he had stayed in the house so many years and hadn't gone out and done the things his brother had. His value was placed on him out of love. Pure and simple. And the value didn't fluctuate either. Even though the son had lived with his father this whole time. Even though the son had never left the home. Had never done those things. That his value didn't go up or down. It was the same. It was complete love from the father. And so here you have two brothers that are struggling with their worth. One thinks that he's more worthy because of what he's done, and one thinks he's less worthy because of what he's done. And what the Father is trying to say is you both are worthy. Not because of what you've done, but because of what I've done.
Amen.
And that's salvation, friends.
Amen.
Our value is based solely on what the buyer has paid for us. And what did he pay for us? His life. His life. One of the biggest tricks the devil tries to get us to believe is that we are worthless. I know I felt that way in my life because of sin, because of bad decisions. I felt like the prodigal. Like I'm not even worthy to kiss your shoe, much less live in a house with you. And yet the Father says, I've got a place of honor waiting for you. I'm going to treat you like a son, even though you disinherited me. I'm going to treat you like a son or daughter, even though you disgraced my name. I'm going to treat you like a son or daughter, even though you claim you didn't know me. It's not based upon our works. It's based upon the price that He paid for us, which was His life. Not based on merit. It's not based on our works. It's not based on our knowledge. Sometimes we think, well, I know more than this person. That's got nothing to do with anything. That's just God has given you more responsibility, more work. If you think about it. It's not based upon our denomination. It's going to be many in heaven. Many, many people in heaven. Of all flavors. And I'm excited about that. Our value is also not based upon the type of sin that we've chosen. We want to devalue our brother and sister because their sin is different from our sin. All sin is the same, and all separates us from God. And we can't use that to measure each other. So none of those things I just listed has anything to do with our value to God. Nothing. It's what He paid for us. We are worth Christ's death. That's how much we are worth to Him. When someone pays that much for you, that should tell you your infinite value. Every morning when you wake up, every night when you go to bed, you should think, I am worth an infinite price. Something beyond all the riches of the earth combined, all the universe combined. I am worth that to somebody. And that should cause us to respond out in love and hopefully obedience. So God is a long-term investor. And His value is based upon what He paid for you, not in our works. And finally, the investment in you is love. Is love. It's purely out of love. God wants just two things from you. Here's what He ultimately wants from all of us. This is why He has loved us. Is so that we love Him. And we love one another. So He's put all this time from the beginning, this hands-on experience that we have with God, that He personally came here and designed every last thing, the DNA of every plant, of every animal, the water, the warmth, the sun, all that was designed for us from a God that's very personal, very intimate. He gives us everything His creative abilities can afford. He gives us dominion. And when we chose to sin and go against Him, then He gave His Son. So God has given us everything He has. Everything His creative abilities have, everything His riches can give us, and even for Himself to come here personally and die for us. Because He loves us. Simple as that. And what He wants to see from His investment, which is us, His investment in love, is that we love Him and in turn we love each other.
Amen.
That is the gospel. That is the gospel. I want you guys to remember, you are an investment. You are the investment of investments. You are the most important thing. You know, we always talk about how that the gospel is the pearl of great price. No, you are the pearl of great price. He sold what He had, His throne, to buy you. We are the pearl of His eye. And I'd like to close with a verse. Psalm 139, starting with, I think it's verse 13. Psalm 139, and I think David said it very well. It says, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. God loves you. He loves you more than we can imagine. And when the devil tries to tell you otherwise, just remind him of the price that was paid for you. Dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you that we are worth something to you. That in our broken lives, in our brokenness, and even in our rebellion, that you find somehow to see a redeemable quality in us. And that you can take what's broken and what would be anybody in the right mind would say a bad investment, and you get something out of it. You make righteous people of us. You make obedient people of us. You help us become loving and kind and to help others. And I would just ask in this world that we live in that's constantly reminding us of our failures, that we look to the cross, and we look to your resurrection and understand what we are really worth to you. And help us to lead others to understand the same. In your name we pray. Amen.